What is up guys, I'm James from Kit Guru. Welcome back to the channel. I suppose you guys are probably used to us now reviewing some of the most top of the line, cutting edge and expensive hardware out there. Today we're sort of doing the complete opposite of that with this absolute bargain 240mm all-in-one CPU cooler from Cougar. This is available in other different sizes as well, so as well as this 240mm version, you can also pick it up in 120mm, 280mm and 360mm versions. And the reason I say this is an absolute bargain is because this 240mm version, you can pick this up in the UK now for under £55. But before we dive into the review, I just want to remind you guys that have not subscribed to the Kit Guru channel yet, please do so. Hit that subscribe button down below. And if you want to maybe support the channel in other ways, you can head over to our store where you can pick up some really cool Kit Guru merch. And don't forget, over at the kitguru.net website, you can catch up on all the latest tech news and all the latest hardware reviews. Obviously, there are other all-in-one close-up CPU coolers on the market around a similar price to this Aqua 240 from Cougar. You've obviously got the Arctic Liquid Freezer 2, which we know is an excellent performer, and Cooler Master. They also do some budget all-in-one closed-loop coolers, but do they have all the features of the Aqua 240? So with this, you have a 27mm thick aluminium radiator, which is pretty typical. You have a high-speed pump that is integrated into the CPU block. Again, a typical feature of an all-in-one CPU cooler. Fully addressable RGB lighting. That's not something you always get on the budget models. And you also have two 120mm high-speed PWM fans with a broad range of 600 to 2000 RPM. So you've more or less got there all the features of a more premium, high-end and more expensive all-in-one CPU cooler. And that kind of makes you wonder why these other manufacturers are charging like double or maybe even triple of what the Aqua 240 costs at the moment. You can pick this up now on Amazon in the UK at just £53.99, and I think CCL do it for around about £51.60. So this does sound like really excellent value for money, but there must be a catch. Surely there's a catch. The only thing we don't really know about this cooler is the OEM supplier. We can see the mounting system, shape of the block, and other little details that it's not from one of the big OEMs such as Acertech or Coolit. We also know that it's not even from Appaltech, which made a recent MSI cooler. So all we can think is this maybe is some kind of lesser known Chinese brand. So that may kind of ring alarm bells for one or two people. You wonder what the quality is like and whether this is going to stand the test of time. But I suppose at £53.99 or £51, do you have to really worry about that? I mean, if it lasts a couple of years, you've probably got your money's worth out of it maybe. The only other thing that slightly worries me and is worth noting is that you only get a 1-year warranty with it. Obviously with those more expensive all-in-one CPU coolers, some of those offer up to 5 years warranty. So, you know, that is probably getting that bit of extra peace of mind for that extra money you're paying. But anyway, let's have a look inside the box and see what you've got. I mean, the packaging, if that's anything to go by, it looks pretty smart. Quite like this dark, almost black and orange theme. It really stands out well. You got a nice quality feel to it actually. There's nothing bad at all about the packaging. Inside the box, it looks very similar to any other all-in-one cooler. A bit of foam on the top. Everything inside is arranged inside a kind of cardboard crate again. That is a typical kind of packaging of these coolers. So we've got two of these Vortex WB120 fans, and these are a high static pressure fan with a PWM speed range of 600 to 2000 RPM, so that's a nice broad range of adjustment you've got. No RGB lighting on these, you've just got a Cougar logo in the middle. There's a bit of detail into the fan blades. And around the back you've got this patented frame design, which Cougar say that it boosts airflow or something like that and optimizes the airflow. Technically they should be ideal for use on radiators, so they look alright. I mean, they feel pretty solid. There's a slight slight amount of twist on the frame, but it is quite a thin wall, and you've also got anti-vibration rubbers there. We also have a bag full of mounting hardware. There's a two-way fan splitter, an installation backplate for AMD and Intel platforms. There's a bag full of all kinds of screws and washers and fixings, or obviously they'll be used for the various different platforms this supports. And the cooler does support a wide range of current mainstream desktop platforms. Unfortunately, the 240mm and the 120 versions are not TR4 compatible, but according to Cougar, the 280 and 360mm version is. There's another bag with Intel 2011 standoffs. That's an upper mounting bracket for AMD installations. As is typical with these all-in-one CPU coolers, the Intel upper mounting bracket comes pre-installed to the CPU block. Cougar also includes this wireless RGB controller. You have the option with the Aqua 240 to either connect directly to a 5V 3-pin motherboard header for the RGB control, or alternatively, you can use this wireless remote control. That's a nice feature. There is also a user manual and installation guide included. Nice and simple installation that looks like. And then obviously there is the cooler itself. As you can see, the radiator, like I said previously, this is an aluminium radiator, 27mm thickness. Quite a nice, even looking matte black coating on it. Sometimes you get like a satin finish on these, but this is a completely flat matte finish. It looks well coated, nice and even. Doesn't look anything wrong with the quality of the radiator as far as I can see. Dense, thin structure, like we're used to seeing on all-in-one CPU coolers. At the radiator side, you can see the tubing that's fixed, so there's no rotation on that side. There's some kind of fill port at the top here, and as you can see, there's no Cougar branding or logos on the radiator anyway, just a barcode on one side. So it's a pretty neutral looking thing. It should fit in nicely into most different builds. Braided sleeving on the tubing. And that is a nice thick reinforced tubing. And it looks like it is also quite flexible, so you could get quite tight bends with that and not have to worry about kinking the tubing and restricting flow, so that's a good thing to see. At the CPU block side, we've got 90-degree articulating fittings there, so that's going to help you when you're trying to orientate the position of this CPU block. So that's another handy feature that we like to see, and it's good to see that that's included on this, even though it is a real budget all-in-one CPU cooler. As I mentioned previously, the Intel upper mounting bracket comes pre-installed. That just simply slides on and off. That doesn't look difficult to change at all. Then at the base of the CPU block, you've got this protective film covering the copper micro channel cold plate, and that looks like a pretty nice looking copper cold plate. It's got a good smooth machine finish to it. There's not really much you can say that looks wrong with that. At the top, there's a bit more film protecting the top cover, and as you can see, we've got a Cougar logo in the middle, and then an outer ring, which is obviously a diffuser for the RGB lighting. There's one thing worth mentioning about this top cover is it doesn't seem like it's easily removable. So unlike some of the more premium coolers where you can take this top cover off and move it round to suit the positioning of the CPU block when it's installed, it doesn't look like you can do that easily with this. So that is a slight negative, but again, we've got to think that this is really, really good value for money. Maybe we should be not expecting that, or we shouldn't expect too much, but other than that, looks like you've got pretty much everything that you would get from the more premium models. In terms of connectivity, at the pump, you've got a SATA connection, so that powers the pump. You've also got a 5V 3-pin addressable RGB lighting header, one to plug into the motherboard, and then that looks like you can extend it there, so if you want to plug in some RGB fans later on, looks like that's possible as well. One thing I have noticed that is missing in terms of the connectivity at the pump side is a header for the motherboard, so it doesn't seem like there's any way of being able to adjust the speed of the pump. It's not a massive deal, that. I mean, I tend to usually run the pump at full speed anyway because they're generally pretty quiet these days, but there's also no software included with this cooler, so everything is adjusted, so fan speeds, and if you could have adjusted the pump speed, that would have all been done either using motherboard software or using the motherboard BIOS. For me, that's not a big problem. I'm quite used to setting up fan curves and messing around with the fan speeds and stuff like that in the BIOS. I've got quite a bit of experience with it, but for someone that maybe is less experienced and pretty new to messing around with fan curves, that might be an issue for them, not having some user-friendly software, I'm not sure, but for me it's a plus point for me because it also cuts down on the amount of cables you've got and means that you'll end up with a nice, really tidy final installation. And then connectivity of the fans, you obviously plug both the fans into this two-way splitter, and then these are connected up via a standard 4-pin PWM cable. So again, all the fan speeds will need to be configured either through the motherboard BIOS or through your motherboard fan configuration software. So that's pretty much all the details about the cooler. So far, there's nothing that really stands out that is bad about it. In terms of the build quality for what you're paying for this, it looks pretty good, and I'd say it's comparable to other all-in-one coolers that are much more expensive than this. Next thing to do is install it in the system, see what the performance is like, and we'll run through the installation process as well because this CPU block type I've not installed before, so it's kind of a learning curve for me as well. But looking at what's involved with the kit, it looks really simple. I had a quick look at the installation manual that comes with the Aqua 240. The process looks really simple. All you should need is a Phillips screwdriver like this one. Doesn't have to be a Corsair one, but any Phillips screwdriver will do. We'll be installing the cooler on our CPU test bench, which includes a Intel Z390 motherboard. This is the Z390 Aorus Extreme from Gigabyte. We've also got a Intel Core i9-9900KS CPU in there, so it's not the most modern CPU, but it is still an extremely powerful platform, and it produces a lot of heat, especially when it's overclocked. Installation on AMD systems looks even more simple, as it uses the stock AMD retention system, so this is probably the most difficult installation, so it's good that we're showing you this process now. As I say, AMD installation will be similar, but it just uses the stock retention system. So for the first step of the installation, we'll prepare this backplate. For Intel installations, you want the actual Intel markings. They want to be facing the underside of the motherboard. We use these long standoffs and actually push these in from the side that is labelled AMD. And for our Intel 115X platform, we want to go for the middle hole. You can see there's kind of 3 holes in these brackets, and the 115X is the central hole. So once you push the standoffs through the holes, you take one of these plastic retaining washers and just slip that over the standoff. That helps to hold it in position. Obviously do the same for the other 3. So now working from the back of the motherboard, you just want to line up the bracket and the standoffs with the holes in the motherboard and drop it in place. And then now working from the front of the motherboard, just take these plastic spacers and just push these over the standoffs. They actually fit tighter one way than another, so you can see that way around they're pretty slack, but turn it round, they're a tighter fit, and that again helps to hold this this backplate and these standoffs in position while you're working. So just pop all 4 of those in position the correct way around, and there you go, that holds the backplate to the motherboard. For the next part of the installation, we are going to install the fans to the radiator. You might want to leave this step till a bit later, until you actually decide where this radiator is going in the case and whether you want to install the fans on the front in a pull configuration or on the back in a push configuration. But we'll install the fans now because we know that they're going on this side and there's only really one way to install this on our test bench, so we just need to put the fans on the radiator in the push configuration that we're using, and then just using these 8 long screws, just attach them to the radiator using your Phillips screwdriver. There's the fans both installed to the radiator. Now that they are fixed to this radiator, you don't really notice that flex that we saw in the fan frames earlier. They've all stiffened up nice, so yep, they seem perfectly good. So there isn't any pre-applied thermal compound coating that comes on the cooler from the factory, but there is a small tube of thermal compound included, so that's good. And the next step is to apply some thermal compound to your CPU. I just like to use a bit of a dot in the middle method, and just some smaller blobs in the 4 corners. That just gives you a bit more of an even spread of thermal compound. Just the blob in the middle, it doesn't tend to cover the CPU fully these days, so I just put those little blobs in the corner just to give you a bit more even coverage. And then the next step is to just lower the CPU block down over the CPU, and then aligned up with these holes and these standoffs. And then you just need to take these thumb screws with built-in springs, and then these are used to retain the CPU block to the backplate. What we like to do is just screw these down kind of evenly and progressively, going from corner to corner. Again, that helps to spread the pressure of the CPU block over the CPU, and it helps spread out that thermal compound nice and evenly. So we just tighten them up a few turns at a time, working from each corner. And again, these are spring-loaded thumb screws, so you can't really over tighten these, and it does help getting the correct amount of mounting pressure. Shouldn't be any issue with mounting pressure problems or poor thermal conductivity because of the mounting pressure. So you just keep going with these until you feel that they're fully tightened. Once you feel that resistance, then you know that they are fully tightened, and that's the CPU block installed. We have the motherboard and the cooler installed back into the test bench, and I've noticed a few comments about the test bench and what make it is, where I got it from and that. Actually, this is a homemade test bench. I just literally made it out of an old motherboard tray from, I think it was an old Fractal case. Just stuck some legs on it, and away you go. The radiator mounting is a little bit wobbly, but other than that, it does just pretty much the same job as a test bench that you can buy. But yeah, it's just a homemade thing. Anyway, back on track with the installation. All we need to do now is just connect up the cables. The SATA cable coming from the CPU block, we just need to connect that up to a spare SATA power connector from the power supply, which is pretty simple. And then the 5 volt 3-pin addressable RGB connection just needs to connect up to our motherboard. Addressable RGB header up at the top there, and then it's just a case of connecting up the fans. So like we said previously, this two-way fan splitter, we just connect that up to both of the fans, and then just connect the other end of the fan splitter to the CPU fan header on the motherboard, and that's it. You should have full PWM speed control of those fans now, and like I said, there's no other drivers or software needed to complete this installation. That does mean that you are limited to the motherboard BIOS or the motherboard software for controlling the fans. But other than that, the installation is really simple. There's nothing that even the most novice user shouldn't be able to complete, and it's only taken roughly 10 to 15 minutes, if that. And it's really simple, really straightforward. You can't really go wrong with the installation. System's powered on, everything's working as it should be. First, before we jump into the performance, Just going to have a look at the RGB lighting effects and see how they're controlled. Obviously there's two ways to do this. One is with this wireless controller that comes with the CPU cooler. The other way is using the motherboard software. So on this controller you've got a series of buttons. At the top is the power button. You press it once and that uses the control via this wireless controller. You've got a mode button that cycles through the different pre-configured patterns. You can also adjust the colour of the pattern by flicking up and down on these buttons. And then you can also adjust the brightness there. The S button adjusts the speed of the patterns. There's also a choice of various different colours, so you can just choose a different solid colour to maybe match in with your system theme. And then if you hit that power button again, the RGB lighting then switches over to control via the motherboard, and then you just have to configure using your motherboard software. Like with this Gigabyte motherboard, we'd use the RGB Fusion software. Obviously this is also compatible with Asus, ASRock, MSI, all the main players. So you've got full control either using this wireless controller or using your standard motherboard software. So now on to the performance. Now we're going to see how this stacks up against other CPU coolers we've tested previously. So we've got IDA64 booted up and HW Info logging the temperatures. For the first series of tests, we have the fans running at 100% RPM, and we'll use three different profiles that we already have configured in the BIOS with three different CPU frequencies, starting off at 4 GHz, then 4.7, and then at 5.1 GHz, and that should push the limits of this CPU cooler to find out exactly what it's capable of. So in this first chart you can see the performance with the CPU set at 4 GHz. The Aqua 240 records 37.1 average delta temperature, so the delta means that the actual CPU temperature reading is deducted from the ambient temperature in the room. 37.1 degrees, that puts it in mid-table in our charts. At 4.7 GHz you can see the performance again is solid. That again is right up there with the EKAO 240 and just ahead of the Arctic Liquid Freezer 2. So at 4.7 GHz you're still getting really solid performance out of the Aqua 240. And then in what we like to call our extreme overclocking profile with the 9900KS set at 5.1 GHz across all cores, you can see the average delta recorded by the Aqua 240 is 65.4 degrees, which again is really solid performance, just slightly higher than the much more expensive EKAO. You can see that it beats off competition from a larger 280mm all-in-one CPU cooler in the form of the Deepcool Castle 280X. So with that 100% fan configuration, the performance is pretty good, pretty solid. Then in our noise normalized tests, where we limit the noise output of the fans by adjusting the fan speed to 40 decibels, you can see the performance does drop off a little. The Cougar Aqua 240 records a 57 degrees C average delta temperature. It's still, solid performance. It still beats the Cooler Master ML240R, which is a decent all-in-one CPU cooler. And like we said, for the value for money factor, you can't really argue with that performance. Maximum noise levels of the Aqua 240 with the fans running at full speed, which is around about 2000 RPM. You're looking at 46.6 decibels, which is slightly higher than we'd like to see normally. I mean, it's not at the Corsair levels, so it's not completely distracting or annoying, but some users that like a really quiet work environment may find it a little distracting. But you can obviously, with that wide PWM range, you can obviously tune these fans to suit your requirements. So overall, performance and noise levels, we've got a really good balance. And like I've probably said quite a few times, for this kind of budget, you really can't argue with that performance or those noise levels. So overall, it's a pretty solid showing for the Aqua 240. Like I mentioned several times, for that price you really can't argue with what you're getting. Addressable RGB lighting, the implementation of that is, it's as good as any. I've seen much worse RGB lighting than that before. It's nice vivid colours. You've got you've got options with how you control the RGB lighting, and there's all kinds of preset patterns, colours you can scroll through using that wireless remote. The build quality of the cooler, there doesn't seem anything wrong with it at the moment. Obviously, we've touched on that fact before, that we're not really sure what the durability and the longevity of this will be, because it's come from that manufacturer that's kind of unknown. But for now, everything seems to be working fine. Obviously, during our testing time, we don't really get the time to test it over a long period, so we can't comment really how long this is going to last. But, looking at it, it seems to be as well built as more expensive coolers, and I quite like the appearance of it as well. It's a nice, subtle radiator design. It's good to see that we've got some premium looking braided sleeving on the tubing. Those rotating fittings at the bottom as well, they're also a good thing. And actually, the CPU block itself, it's quite an attractive looking thing. I like that square shape. Doesn't really impose on the system too much, and it just fits in well. It's nice and neutral. There's not really much I can complain about. And then obviously performance as well. It's up there with some of the more expensive coolers. Maybe when the noise is normalised, it could be a little better, but for the money, like I've said, you really can't complain. If you want to check out this cooler in a little bit more detail, check out the specifications, have a look at those performance charts. Again, you can head over to the kitguru.net website where you can see the full written review. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below if you've enjoyed watching this video, and if you want to pick up some of the Kit Guru merch, head over to our store. I've been James for Kit Guru. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.